Welcome to OutWithDan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to OutWithDan. Today I'm excited to talk to Max Hovey about his new book, No FATS, No FEMS. Max is a London-based writer, creator, and queer advocate. He dedicates his platforms to sparking discussions about and promoting body acceptance, sex positivity, mental health awareness, and other topics related to LGBTQIA+ issues. I read that straight off the back of the book, y'all. So Dan does not learn his lines ahead of time. So welcome, Max.
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm very excited to chat with you about this. So I saw on an interview you did that you said that once you had the title of the book, you knew what you wanted to do with the book. So where did the title No FATS, No FEMS come from?
Well, it's a phrase that, unfortunately, many of us are all too familiar with. And over the years, it's bothered me more and more. And I've done research into the real impact that it has psychologically and on a community level. And I've always wanted to be a writer, and I knew I wanted to write something of substance that could help in some way, shape, or form, but I just wasn't quite sure how to structure it and how to approach it. And then it was just all a bit of a scramble in my brain, and then suddenly that phrase came into my head, and I wrote that down as the title, and I was like, that's it. I was considering yes FATS, yes FEMS, but I didn't want it to present the book as being too self-help and encouraging people to accept themselves as they are. Of course, there's some of that in there, but the main premise of the book is to encourage people to unpack their own prejudices around others. So I chose this title because it's a very polarizing title. It's one that's definitely sparked some debate in my comments, which is exactly what I needed. I needed it to start a conversation, whether it be positive or negative. It's got people talking, and that's, you're not going to make change unless you start talking. So it's done its job.
Good. I like that. I like it. And I told Max before we started recording that for me, the first time I saw the phrase no FATS, no FEM was on a dating site. And I thought, well, at least they don't want me. And I know that in advance. So I was very complacent about it. But I have come to learn that it is so polarizing and so negative based that it's not okay to use that phrase. However, except for the title of your book.
I mean, that's where it was. I was a bit worried about it because I was like, is it too aggressive, the title?
No.
But I was saying to you, like I said before we started recording, that you're not alone in feeling that. There's been plenty of people when I have discussed this online who have said, I don't mind it because it tells me that they're not interested straight away, so I'm not wasting my time. And I do more than understand that. But it's the phrase itself is a lot less about what it does necessarily on a personal level, on an individual level. When you see it once, like I see it, and it doesn't ruin my day. But when you see it over and over and over again, and people believe it's okay to use it on a grander scale, it really shapes the way we feel we can treat people. And I think that's the larger discussion with that phrase.
I totally agree. So tell the audience where you grew up, and are you an only child or do you have siblings? What was it like in the household you grew up in?
So I born and raised in Southeast England. I grew up in a relatively small, pretty conservative coastal town. So I grew up with pretty not even there wasn't, prejudice wasn't rife, but there wasn't differing perspectives, shall we say. Everyone was pretty similar. And I'm not an only child. I am the youngest of three, by 8 and 11 years. And it was interesting because I'm the youngest of two older brothers. who they're both straight. They're both, you know, pretty masculine. I grew up with, you know, one of them really into football, the other one really into rugby, you know, bringing home girlfriends. And so not only was there the age difference, there was the fact that we were very different as people. And although I've never had any issues with my family, they've always been incredibly supportive and understanding.
Yeah.
It still made me feel like the odd one out. I still never really felt like I fit in. And that was really highlighted for me being in that kind of household. But then when I went to secondary school, or your equivalent of high school, when I was 11, 12, I went from going to a mixed school, boys and girls, in my younger years, to go into an all boys secondary school. And that was really hard because I went from, you know, having most of my friends being girls, we had similar interests. I felt like I didn't really have to hide certain parts of myself, to then suddenly being in a, not just an all boys school, but an all boys secondary school where, you know, everyone's starting puberty, everyone's becoming more their version of masculine. Everyone feels the need to impress each other. Everyone feels the need to pick on others to, you know, uplift themselves. And I was suddenly, you know, 2 days in, I had my voice mocked for being too high pitched and too effeminate. And I was like, okay, I can't sound like this. That's never been brought to my attention before. That's never been an issue, but that is an issue. Okay, noted. And yeah, I had to completely change myself because I was going to be in that environment for at least the next 5 years, and I didn't want to have to put up with ridicule, and that kind of set me on a path of believing that effeminate expression wasn't okay.
I remember as a child, I had an enormously high-pitched squeal of a laugh. And I remember that, you know, when you're little, it's cute. When you get to middle school, you know, 6th, 7th, 8th grade here in the States, it is not cute any longer. And so I learned over the years to have a more husky laugh, which I drink. So that sort of kept it in the husky area. And so I never smoked cigarettes, so I didn't have that to bring it down. But I remember also, I was never allowed to use my hands in describing something. You know, they had to be completely still. And I remember my mom saying, basically, don't be too much. And I do wonder sometimes, you know, because books like this make me reflect on things. And I do wonder sometimes, would I have had a different life path had I had more supportive parents? You know, I am really flamboyant and out there and I make people laugh, but I mean, I might have had a different path than doing accounting for a day job. Who knows? I don't know.
I mean, I've still got that high pitched laugh. I was the same when I was in my like mid-teen years. I tried to almost mimic my brother's laugh and make it as deep as possible. But now, like, me and one of my best friends, who ironically also looks quite masculine presenting, but as soon as we're together, we're a lot more effeminate, and we joke saying we sound like witches around a cauldron. Like, we're just squealing, and it's nice because you just don't care.
Yes,
when you're with your people, you don't care.
That's right. So there's a lot in this about what I call tribes. So at what point in your life did you find your tribe or figure out what your tribe is? Or is that still an ongoing evolution?
I kind of jokingly identify with tribes. You know, I'll maybe occasionally in an Instagram caption or a tweet or something, like, call myself a bear, but I don't really identify with it in a serious sense, because I never really felt like I fit into any of them. You know, when I was in my late teens, you know, having spent 4 years in all boys school where I was continuously invalidated and made to feel like I wasn't enough, I didn't understand what it felt like to be enough, to what it felt like to be wanted. And then I vividly remember, I think I was, you know, dabbling with photography and, you know, discovered Photoshop. And I remember at one point I'd posted a photo that I'd slightly edited, and suddenly, you know, that got a lot more likes than all the other stuff I posted. I was like, oh, people like this version of me. That's fun. So I did it again and did it again until it got to the point where I was like, it was continuous. I was continuously editing my appearance, and then I did the same with my body, and then was going for that very, very toned, slender physique that was also the only representation I'd ever had. And I then just kind of fell into that. I didn't really involve myself in tribe culture as such. But I guess to an extent that is part of it, because they're not really discussed as such here, but jocks, or I would have been described as a twunk at one point, and it's like, even I can't say it without almost rolling my eyes, because it does instantly puts you in a box. And not only you then put in that box in terms of how you have to look, but also how you have to act. You're suddenly attributed with certain characteristics and certain mannerisms and certain behaviors. And one of the things I talk about in my book is that those who self-identify with certain tribes are statistically more likely to battle with disordered eating, because once they're in that tribe, they feel like they have to maintain that body to remain there. So, those who are, twinks might not want to go through twink death. At the same time, you have those who are incredibly muscular that can also partake in types of disordered eating to remain that size. But at the same time, there will be those who identify with the bear tribe who may deliberately try to remain big in order to stay within that tribe. And so I've never really identified with tribes in a literal sense, but I guess I kind of fell into them. Sorry, I'm very aware that I'm getting very sweaty, but as I said, it's insanely hot here.
Oh no, you look perfectly fine, Max. So I don't think I've ever identified with a tribe either. I remember when I was young and when I was in college and I came out, we had one gay bar in the town I went to college in. And Friday night was drag show night. I mean, every drag queen was in full regalia on Fridays. The bar was packed to the gills. On every other night, they did some event or another. It was never as packed as it was on drag night. Yet drag queens were such a scourge in the streets. I had friends that wouldn't go around a drag queen for years because they're like, they're just too out there. They're too effeminate. But it's always those on the fringe that do all the fighting in life because they're put down so often. I often look up to marginalized people, really marginalized people. I realize I'm an old white man and I'm cis, but I'm queer. And, I realize how privileged I am. I can walk into any room in any place in this country and not feel threatened by being there, unless it's, a KKK rally or Republican National Convention. Then I'd feel a little out of place. But other than that, it's like, so I don't identify with the tribe. And I realize how very blessed I am to be able to, I've never passed. No one ever looked at Dan and said, oh, he's straight. No one ever thought that. And once I came to embrace that, I never expected it. So every interview I've been on, I assume the person interviewing me thinks I'm gay from the minute I say hello. And that way I'm never disappointed in what someone else's reaction will be.
Mm.
And I think there's a beauty when you get to that part of your life where you're that comfortable with who you are. I'm never going to be a jock. I couldn't hit a basketball hoop if my life depended on it. Never.
Me neither. No.
I mean, basketball was the one sport I didn't want any part of because I knew I wouldn't even get the ball close to the whatever that thing is up there, the backboard or whatever. I'm like, no. My dad put a basketball goal in the backyard. I think I hit it once. I'm like, why? I don't know what, I mean, when I came out to my dad, he said, we always thought you were. And I thought, well, why didn't you make it any easier on me? But I also realize that they only have the education that they have, which is something that I noticed your platform is heavy into education. And I'm very proud of you for that, Max, because I think that unless people are educated, they don't understand.
That's the thing. I talk about, there's two types of ignorance. There's those who are, willfully ignorant.
Yeah,
They they probably know that they're hurting people, and they just don't give a shit. They don't care. They're more than happy in their comfortable, privileged life, knowing that other people are having it more difficult, but they don't care because it's not impacting them. They have no
right.
interest in learning, no interest in understanding other people's perspectives. And these are the people that just aren't worth our time. We're just going to be banging our head against the brick wall. But the vast majority of people who are, for majority of the time, especially when it comes to politics, they're sitting on the fence. It's because they don't have the information, they don't have the education. And, whilst we can say if we want to, well, we have the information, why aren't they going out and looking for it themselves? There is so many things going on in the world that we cannot expect people to be clued up on every single thing that is happening. It's not possible. People have their own things going on. And so when they just don't have the information, sometimes when you do just have, a very small and tame and polite conversation, a lot of people will go, "Oh, I didn't know that. Like, thanks for telling me. I'll know from now on." They're the people we want to be speaking to. I've had those conversations with even family members where they maybe have said something completely unintentional. I've had to go, "That's not quite right. That's why this happens." And they've gone, "Oh, I didn't realize. I'm glad you mentioned it." And yeah, I just think that's the approach that we need to take. Like, it's one of the things that one of the interviewees in my book, Danny St. James, the founder of trans charity Not a Phase, said was that her hope when it comes specifically to do with trans people is that she'll meet people where they're at with the education and information they have and go from there. And I think that's all we can do. Like, an example I always like to give is when it comes to like veganism, for example. I've been through a period in my life where I was vegan. I've then done vegetarian. I've then done flexi. I've done different things. But if someone says to me, maybe you could just reduce your meat consumption on 1 day a week. And if everyone does that, that makes a difference, rather than someone sitting there saying, "You're a terrible human being because you consume animal products. You need to quit it completely. Like, it's absolutely diabolical." People aren't going to listen. If you
No.
just start attacking people, they're not going to listen. So it's just about meeting people where they're at and making small compromises. And I think sometimes, particularly on the left, we expect people to just kind of accept things and be where we're at straight away without actually giving them the time and grace to, to learn. Because we've all been in a place when we're ignorant at some point. And so I think, we would have wanted people to give us that patience. And I think we owe it to other people to give them the same.
I agree with you. And I also, I don't like the cancel culture we live in. Someone makes a misstep, they made a misstep. If someone is filled with hatred, it right away because they don't mask it. It's as you were saying earlier, they don't care who they hurt. They don't care who's suffering because they just don't give a damn. However, sometimes somebody says the wrong thing, it's a slip. They didn't mean to, or they revert back to when they were ignorant. And then we on the left want to cancel them out. I'm like, why? Give the person a break already. We all deserve a break. Everybody deserves a break. Except
that's one of the things, yeah, exactly. But as a community, we preach, imperfection and loving yourself as you are, and no one's perfect until someone slips up. And then it's like, but you shouldn't have slipped up. You should know better. And we don't give anyone else the grace to learn and to own their mistakes and to apologize and to do better. Like, some people genuinely, they want to see someone's life fall apart quite often over something that could just be a simple mistake. And sometimes even an apology isn't enough for them. And that's, we can be quite self-righteous, and our ability to be, to hold people accountable is both our biggest strength and our biggest weakness. It's something that the right need to do a lot more of, because they don't hold anyone accountable unless it's someone that they just don't like. Whereas we, I think, almost do it too much, to the point that people just kind of throw their hands up and go, "Look, I can't do this because I can't do right for doing well."
Well, yes, and I think that unfortunately humanity loves to build pedestals, but they also like to knock them out from under someone. And I'm like,
Hmm.
wow, can't I am that kumbaya person. Can't we just all get along nicely, play nicely, kids? There's enough pieces of pie for everybody. Just don't try to take someone else's pie. But I think that's a simplistic way of looking at life. So, one of the other things I sort of want to chat about with you, because I feel like I have an audience with you, is people how they identify. I had someone say to me not long ago that they didn't understand people's pronouns or their whether maybe they look like you and find out that you're trans. They don't understand which pronouns to use, and I say, it's like nicknames. Oftentimes my mother's family was heavy on nicknames. All of her and her siblings had a nickname. People knew my mom as Snoops. They didn't know her name was Marjorie. Some people didn't ever know what her name was because she'd been Snoops her whole life. And so I say it's like a nickname. If someone says they want to be a him or a her or they or them, take them at their word. You may make a boo-boo, apologize, and do better next time. It's such a simple thing in life.
Mm.
But I
I mean,
think that,
that's exactly it.
and I also think that eh, well, so one of the books behind me is reddish colored. So
Mm.
it's a red book. So when we want to label everything because we want to recognize it. So if the book is red, I know I'm looking for a red book. I don't look at a blue book, I look for a red book. But it is one of those things that labels can both be informative and hurtful at the same time. If
Hmm.
someone tells you what their label is, try to commit it to memory.
Yeah.
See, can I go on tour with you, Max?
I was
Because
going to say, it
that's
sounds like you've written this book.
well, I will say that these are things that I'm very passionate about because life is difficult for everyone at one point in their life. They've had a tough go of life. And I
Mm.
just think, why can't we try to make it a little easier for everyone?
Mm. And that's when you said about pronouns as an example where you slip up, you apologize and you move on. It is that simple. And I've had conversations about that before where some people have said, oh, but don't just downplay it as that you can brush it off. I'm like, no, but you you apologize and you mean it, and then you make the effort to try to remember in future. But I think some people are so fearful of getting it wrong that they'll over apologize, make it an even bigger deal. And it's like, no, you don't need to over apologize.
No.
But at the same time, you also need to try to respect it. If you like, I still slip up from time to time. How even some of my friends who are non-binary and use they them, sometimes they slip up. Like it happens. Excuse me. And yeah, it's about showing willing to respect people. I think you're quite right. It is that simple.
I agree. And so this book, I believe I heard you say started during the pandemic. Is that right?
No,
Or
what writing it?
yes. Or was it
No,
after?
so it was where are we now? 2026. 3 years ago now.
Okay.
Three
All
years.
right.
Yeah. Um. No, the pandemic was where my personal journey was, where I kind of went from, my entire social media platform was originally built on those very edited and posed selfies and like gym selfies. And it was over the pandemic that I then started to accept my body more and to experiment a bit more with gender and with makeup and with clothing. Because although obviously it was a horrendous time, it was also transformative for a lot of people because we had to be inside. We were forced to sit with ourselves and to think a bit more about who we were and what we wanted out of life. And for a lot of people, yeah, it was hard, but it was also kind of beautiful. And that's what really changed who I was. Like who knows who I would be today if it wasn't for the pandemic. I may be nowhere near as liberal as I am now. But yes, it was the book itself. I started writing about 3 years ago, so it has still been that's still a long time.
Well, it is, but it must be gratifying to see your baby out into the world now.
It's been weird because my publisher is in the US. I'm with Harper One US. It means that the majority of the process has been online. It's been me and my editor on a Zoom call or on WhatsApp or on an email. Almost nothing has been in person. Like I only got a team in the UK where about a month and a half ago because it was coming up to marketing, and even then, I've still not met them in person. So I haven't had anything where I've been like, "Oh yeah, I'm actually releasing a book." So even when I received the first copy, I was like, "This is really cool," but it's just me holding a book. It still doesn't quite feel real. And it was only what day are we? Monday, last Wednesday. So it was released in the US on the 19th, released in the UK on the 21st, or Wednesday the 20th. I went up to a independent bookstore in London where we were doing a pre-order incentive. So if people pre-ordered my book through that bookstore anywhere around the world, it would ship globally, they'd get a signed and dedicated copy. And I turned up and they took me into this back room, and there was just this like table in the mid. I mean, it was very messy, but obviously it was their back office, and they said that there was just stuff everywhere. But in the middle, there was just this table with 100 copies of my book, and I was like, "Oh my god, okay, this is it is happening. Okay, this is real." And then I had to sit there and sign them all. I think half of them, maybe 60 of them, was literally just a signature, but even that was surreal. But about 40 of them, it was like a custom dedication. It was they wanted it to be dedicated to someone, or they wanted like a very specific note written. I was like, oh my god, all these people have not only ordered my book, but they wanted it signed by me. And I was like, oh, okay, this is actually really happening. And that was the first time it genuinely felt really real, and it really hit me. So yes, now it feels incredible. It has been a bit weird though. I felt a little bit numb over the last couple of days, and apparently that's quite normal. But especially because it's been 3 years, like this massive project that you work on for such a long period of time, and then suddenly it's out in the world, and I'm like, okay, what do I do now?
You go through withdrawals is what's going to happen next, Max. Until your next book idea comes along.
It's already in there. I'm hoping to pitch it within the next couple of months. Yes, I'm hoping to write more.
Oh, I hope so as well. So the book is No Fats, No FEMS. It's by Max Hovey. It's out now, and it's so wonderful. Thank you, Max, for being here. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.